All right, I'm going to start the broadcast now. So before I jump in and actually start rambling, I wanted to ask, can someone just type in the Q&A box just some question, just say hello to make sure that you guys can hear me okay. I guess hear and see me. Um, and so I'll make sure to get one of those before we actually jump into it. Okay, Caitlin Brady says hi. Awesome. Okay, cool. So I guess my name is Oscar, and today I really just wanted to talk about two things. So if nothing else, I want to come away with the answer to two questions. And so those questions are, one, what is research? We hear all kinds of things about it. Maybe we don't hear all kinds of things about it. So I just kind of want to get to the bottom of that question and help you guys understand what it really is. And the second thing is, how can I actually get started with doing it in college? So first one, what is it? And second one, more practically, okay, how do I do it? So I should introduce myself. My name is Oscar. I work at experiment.com. We are a startup. And we're a website that we help people who are doing the research get funding for that research. So how do we do that? It's through crowdfunding. So I think it's kind of a cool idea. Think like Kickstarter.com meets research. So to give you an example, if a researcher in Hawaii needs $10,000 to put radio tags on 10 sharks, for example, they need to tag those sharks so that when the sharks are swimming around, they can track all their movements. They can see where they are. They can see if they're near beaches. Let's say you support them, give them $10 towards their $10,000 goal. As they do their research, as the project evolves, you get to kind of see firsthand what exactly they're doing. You get sort of an inside look at some of the really cool, really sort of unreported stuff that you wouldn't otherwise see. So anyway, that's kind of a tangent. That's what Experiment does, but we're, I guess, not really here to talk about that today. Okay, so I guess before I get too far into it, also feel free to interrupt at any point with questions. So if I see a question, I'll stop where I am and I'll take it because it's going to get boring to listen to me ramble for too long otherwise. Okay, cool. So give me a sec while I move the slides forward. Okay, so really, this is just an outline of what we're going to talk about today. It's really basic. I realize it's numbered 1 3 times. That's a mistake. Anyway, okay, so I said we were going to talk about two things. What is research and how to do it? I threw in an extra point in the middle, which is why should I do it? The big why question, which is probably an important one. Okay, so the first question, what is research? We should probably define that before we actually spend some time talking about it. So, okay, let me jump into it here. Okay, so there are probably a bunch of perceptions that we have ahead of time when we think about research. When you hear that word, you might picture something like this, which is like some white room with a bunch of glassware and like water in vials. Who really knows what's actually happening here? Or it might look something like this, which is even better. This is someone like moving food coloring around. Okay, so let's assume that this is not actually just a male model that's mixing colors together and that he's doing actual research. I think even so, this is such a small representation of what research really is. This is just one example out of a million. And we kind of see images like this from day one when we think about research. And that sort of shoehorns it into this really narrow thing, but it's really way bigger than that. So an analogy would be like, let's say from the day you're born, every time you hear the word transport, someone shows you a Prius. Like, sure, a Prius is a way to get around. It's a mode of transport. But there are 1,000 other types of cars out there. And beyond that, there are boats, there's planes, there's rockets, there's rollerblades. You can ride an elephant. Like transport is huge, right? It's not just a Prius, and so research is that broad, maybe even broader, and so it kind of does it a disservice um, to make it look like this all the time. And so what I want to really kind of try to hammer home today is that research is way more than just like the biology or the chemistry, the wet lab work, the pipetting that you think about that might come to mind. Okay, so I guess so. Me saying that research is really broad probably doesn't mean that much. So I wanted to give some actual examples. Before I do, we have a question. So I'm going to jump into it. Give me a second while I pull it up. Okay, the question is, how is the school's biomedical science? Okay, so that's a good question. I think it really depends on the school. Some schools will have really big biomedical science programs. Some schools might have smaller ones. And so that depends a little bit on your college or university. But biomedical science programs these days are pretty ubiquitous. So I think pretty much every school will have it to some extent. Also, that's a really broad term that encompasses a lot of things like bioengineering, biology itself, oftentimes medicine, psychology, clinical psychology. So even that word biomedical sciences is really broad. There are a lot of subdisciplines. So pretty much every university will have something really cool. In fact, it certainly will have something really cool in the field of biomedical sciences, for example. Okay, so I'm going to take this slide off the screen because it's not really that interesting. So what I want to jump into are a couple of examples of research to give you a sense of how broad it really is and what types of things are actually out there. So example number one, this one's kind of gross. This is, I included this because it's sort of topical. This is a picture of the Ebola virus and some of the proteins that it kind of secretes. And so not only do people study everything there is to study about the Ebola virus, and they do so quickly and they do so in real time to try to come up with treatments, but there's a whole field that sort of looks at how Ebola spreads. It's a big public health question. So people are thinking about hospital infrastructure. People are thinking about quarantining, how to handle the logistical problem of a worldwide epidemic. And so that in and of itself is a really important and interesting question. And you think that it's just maybe studying the biochemistry of Ebola. That's certainly not even the only thing that people look at. So that's just one example. A second example, this one's really cool. There are psychologists out there, developmental psychologists, that study babies. They study how baby brains develop, how they evolve, when babies start learning concepts like right versus wrong, good versus evil. So if you're interested in psychology, developmental psychology, you get to work with babies if that's something you like. Again, it's just another example. We also have all kinds of neuroscience research. So to go back to an earlier question, neuroscience oftentimes can be subcategorized in biomedical sciences. So neuroscience is really cool because basically everything you do, every action that you take is a consequence of something that happens in your brain that controls that action. So when your brain becomes chemically imbalanced or neurons form improperly or they form properly, it can have any kind of downstream kind of effect. So yeah, there's all kinds of fascinating research that in the field of neuroscience. So if you're at all interested in brains, how they work, how they make people do what they do, there's enough in that field to keep you hooked forever. Another example, recently I read about a research project that was trying to power cell phones, electronics, using the things that actually power our own cells in our own body. So putting mitochondria into electronics to make them work. So eventually, maybe you won't even have to plug in your cell phone, you just feed it, give it like some sugar or something. So that's like more of a STEM focus that is really interesting. I've got another question, so I'm going to take it really quick. If Ebola broke out in the U.S., what would scientists do to combat the outbreak? That's a really interesting question. It's maybe a little bit of a tangent. I think this is based on sort of an NPR story I listened to recently. But it would be much harder for an Ebola outbreak to happen kind of in the more developed world, just because of like the quarantining, the hospitals, basically the way we try to prevent the infectious disease from spreading. So there's really like minimal contact between patients. And if you want, I can send you the link to that article. It's like or it's also a radio story. So if you tweet at me after this, I can make sure you see that. Okay, so back to the last couple of examples. I don't want to harp on these forever. And so this one is really cool. This looks just like a picture of a mountain. Underneath this mountain, there are like hundreds, if not thousands, of underwater rivers, underwater caves and caverns that really control how water flows underground. It has tons of implications for the water that we use to shower, to drink, to cook with. And so understanding these systems is fundamentally going to be important for how we think about how we use water, where we build cities, where we, how we move that resource around. So anyway, there are researchers out there mapping underground river systems, which is awesome. And then finally, this is just a super cute, heart-melting picture. And this is of a researcher who's studying fur seals in the south of Chile. So they're looking at where these guys move, how often they reproduce, what kinds of things eat them, and generally understand what's really threatening their population and how we can make sure to keep them around forever. So these are all mostly STEM examples. So in fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. I didn't really give any math examples because I know that that's the focus. But even outside of that, there are so many cool research projects happening in the social sciences. So understanding how people interact with people, how they interact with themselves, political science, behavioral economics. There's a lot of really cool stuff. So my whole point with this, if nothing else, doing research is a lot more than just moving a liquid around like that. So that's one thing I want you to walk away with, and always sort of have an open mind to what kinds of things are being studied and why they're interesting and important. Okay, are there any questions about examples? Any of the examples I went over, they were, again, just one, they were just 5 of hundreds. Okay, feel free to send questions as they come in. That's the whole idea. Okay, so the next thing I want to jump into is, I think we're going to go, so I made the slide wrong again. It should be question 2. So why should I do it? Why should I do research? And hopefully I touched on this question a little bit with the examples. Hopefully you saw kind of how cool a lot of these topics were, how interesting, and that in and of itself is reason to do it. Hang on, we got a question popped up. Do students still do barbecues and still do DBQs in college? I think barbecues is the question there. And yeah, definitely probably had like a couple of barbecues every quarter in college. So it definitely still happens. Yeah, I don't think that barbecues are going to go away anytime soon. I'm not like a barbecue expert, but that's my hunch. Okay, so why should I do research? I'll give you guys a couple of practical reasons, because sometimes it's not just enough to know that something is important. Yeah. Got another question. Okay, so I totally blew it. The question was DBQs, not BBQs. Okay, Caitlin, can you type out that acronym? Because I'm drawing a blank on what DBQ stands for. And now I'm also embarrassed for talking about barbecue. Okay, we'll wait for Caitlin's question before. Okay, here it is. Document-based question. That's a really good question, and it kind of caught me off guard because it's really not something that I had seen through college and through grad school. Document-based question. That's a really good question. If you email me after this, I can look into that and I can make sure I give you a better answer than I don't know, because that's the answer I have right now. Document-based question. Yeah, let me think about that, and I'll have all my contact info after this, so I can make sure to try to answer that for you. Okay, so just to get back to question number 1, which is actually question number 2, which is the one in the middle. Okay, hang on. Before I do that, I'm going to answer another question. Do you feel that Cornell notes are a necessary or helpful element of conducting research in college? Okay. So Cornell notes are something, let's see. If I can try to pull up an example of these in real time, that would be probably more helpful for you guys. Okay, so I guess what the question boils down to is Cornell notes are just a way of like systematically answering a research question or doing a question, or basically coming up with a hypothesis and then supporting that hypothesis or disproving that hypothesis with evidence, with data. And so it's really just a way of organizing your thoughts. And yeah, as a way of organizing your thoughts, it can be incredibly helpful. Whether you like strictly stick to Cornell notes, or whether you kind of have your own system, or something entirely different, that's okay. But yeah, I think definitely having some structure with how you approach research questions is really important. So yeah, that's more of a research methodology question. I think what I wanted to really focus on is sticking to sort of the overarching idea of what is research, why do we do it, and how do we get involved. So I'm happy to talk about that more too, like over Twitter. Okay, cool. So practically speaking, why should we do research? And so I think maybe this was a hard thing for me to figure out how to say, but just because something is really cool doesn't mean that you want to do it. Doesn't mean that it's the perfect fit for you. So by that, I mean like doing research, jumping into something and learning about it firsthand. That'll show you not only what's cool, but it'll also show you what you like doing. So you'll kind of learn about yourself first. Maybe you work in the baby lab in the example that I gave, and you found that you just can't stand working with babies, and that's okay, because that's productive. You learn that maybe you're not going to be a developmental psychologist. And that's really valuable, because that'll keep you from going down a path that's not right for you. And the earlier you find that, the better, the more time you kind of save yourself. And that's an example that I probably studied something for way too long, like trying to force myself to love it and say that it was for me, when really maybe it wasn't. So I guess the short answer to that question is, I guess you might learn more about yourself than what you're actually researching, and that's kind of what college is all about. So yeah, I'd say try a lot of different things, or try one thing at least, and really honestly ask yourself, like, is this interesting? Is this something that like I would want to do long term? And if it's not, then that's all right. You can move on to something else. So, okay, let me. I wonder what my next So I don't. I threw this slide in. I think it related to kind of learning about what you really like to do, so that when you get out of college, you feel a little more like you have a sense of where you want to go. And this Ryan Gosling looked like he's super confident in what he does. So you could be like that. Okay, that was kind of silly. So we sort of talked about the middle point, which is number one, but it's actually number two. Why should I do it? I think the actual practical question that probably some of you guys are interested in is like, okay, I'm in, you've been preaching to the choir. How do I actually do it? Like, how do I first get started? How do I get involved? Because that's not a super simple thing. So, okay, what was mine? Okay, so I'll leave this slide up. And I lost my train of thought a little bit. But okay, so we just talked about how broad research is, how there's millions of different things that you can study. So how can we now narrow that pool down and actually concretely think about like, okay, I want to try this. And the way to do that is just kind of look for clues. I would look for a couple of clues about what it is you want to do. So maybe you think that psychology is kind of cool as you're going into college, and it turns out that your intro to psych class is awesome. That's your first clue, right? If you love it and it seems really interesting, that can be the first step. Like, okay, maybe I want to get involved in psychology research because it sounds awesome. Or maybe you learn a concept that blows your mind in your intro to economics class. Like, that's another really good clue. Maybe you have a professor that's just like a really cool guy, really cool girl. And you just want to talk to them more and figure out what it is they kind of do. Because every professor has a teaching agenda, but they almost always also do research. So that's a really good place to just kind of talk to someone who will have a fantastic idea of the field. Okay, so I guess, okay, so let's go with an example. Let's go with the psychology example. Turns out you think you really like psychology and you want to dive in and start doing independent research in psychology. Don't get scared by the independent word. It doesn't have to be all of it. Okay, so going with that example, the first thing that I would do is look at your college psychology department's website. So every university is broken down. It's like a massive tree. So it starts with the university webpage, and then it breaks it down into all of the departments. So all of the subject areas. So you'll have like the biology section of the website, physics, chemistry, a political science, and economics. Basically, every field you can think of is going to be broken down in its own webpage, and it's going to list all of the professors. So just start going through the professors list, and you'll see there's almost always a bullet point or a long set of bullet points that says research interests. A lot of this language is going to be pretty technical. It's going to be hard to wade through and understand. But I'm sure there's going to be a couple of things that grab your attention, things that sound cool. And so that's another clue, right? So you've gone to your university or your college's psychology website. You've looked through some professors, some faculty. And maybe you find like 3 people, I want to talk to them. What they're doing is phenomenal. It's so cool. Or I think it is. It might not for you. And so that's how I would start. And then ultimately, you want to approach that person and see if you can work in their lab, if they have vacancies. And so that's where I thought I would Google how to do that, just to see what kind of information is out there. So, okay, the question that I Googled is, it was a couple of things. It was finding research in college or approaching a lab to do research. And because this is kind of scary, professors, they're the smartest people in the world, right? So approaching them might not be really easy, especially when you're brand new to a field that they're super foremost expert. Okay, so like I said, when I Googled those things, a lot of the information I found, I didn't totally agree with, and I want to explain why. So Some of it was really school specific. Some of it was assumes that you're already doing research and that you like talks about optimizing your own research, which wasn't really a relevant result. And then some of it just feels like it was maybe written by someone who hasn't been in the position of looking for a research project for a really long time. And so I was in that position just a couple of years ago when I was a sophomore and a junior in college, and I feel like I had zero guidance, and things that were online just kind of scared me. So I want to give you guys a little bit more of an example of the kinds of things you'll see online, what you might be told, and why it's important, but it's not necessarily the best way to think about the problem. Okay, so when I went online, I found like at a university's webpage, like a guide to getting into a professor's lab, to starting to do research, and it said, be prepared to answer these questions when you meet with them. Okay, and so one of the questions was, why do you want to do research? The second one was, what are your future educational or professional goals? That one was, how are you supposed to know that? I didn't know that when I was 19, 20. I'm 25 now. Those are still changing on a weekly basis. And so if I was in college, I would be a super, 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 super senior at this point, and I still don't have a good answer to that question. So, like, it's almost as if some of these questions are designed to intimidate you. How does research fit into your goal? Well, that's the whole thing. You don't know. You haven't done research before, right? So the question you have going into doing research is going to be totally different than the answer coming out. And then, have you taken any courses relevant to research? If so, which ones? Chances are in your first 2 years, you're going to have like really limited exposure to research through your coursework. It's going to be maybe a little more fundamental stuff. So I think these questions are a little bit flawed because it's like they're designed to intimidate you. So yeah, don't feel like you have to have the answer to these questions when you're like a freshman or a sophomore or even a junior who's interested in doing research. Like, I think that's something that's going to happen way down the road. So okay, let me figure out real quickly on the slides. Okay, so what I want to present instead of having the answers to these questions is an alternative. So you're probably thinking, okay, you're saying don't know the answer to these questions. What questions should I know the answers to? And I actually think that it's okay to bring questions. So I think, yeah, sometimes answers are overrated. You might think you know an answer, you might know an answer, and then that answer changes for you really shortly thereafter. So instead, I thought I'd compile a list of questions that if you want to meet with a professor and you really want to do research in their lab, it's okay to ask them. Don't feel like you're the one who has to be answering the questions when really they're a pretty awesome source of knowledge. So yeah, it's okay to flip the script and ask them a couple of questions. So I wanted to provide some examples of things that I think would be appropriate to ask, wouldn't be out of line, and would really probably make them think a little bit and make them remember you as a student, which is cool. So just a very basic question you can ask the professor: which of the projects that are listed on your website are ongoing? Okay. Can you tell me about how or when that particular project got started? Or what kind of data do you collect and how do you collect it? And then saying something like, sorry, I got a little lost in the methods, LOL, that's okay. That's like, yeah, those method sections are incredibly long-winded and jargony and hard to understand. And so, yeah, it's okay to ask that question. Finally, or not finally, but another one that I think will really make them kind of stop and think is, like, I'm just getting started. How did you first get involved in research? How did you get your start? What was your spark? chances are that's going to make someone who's been doing research for a long time really kind of stop and reflect back on how they first got really excited about what it is that they do, and they're going to give you a really good answer. And then finally, do you have a student that I can talk to? So pretty much every research professor has like a graduate student. Maybe they have undergrads, maybe they have postdocs. But basically, it's somebody that works for them that already does the research and can give you a really honest answer as to like what it's like, how cool it is, how mind-numbing some of the like repetitive stuff might be. You'll just get a really honest perspective. So asking to talk to a student is always good. Okay, so and again, the numbers here didn't save, but I just kind of wanted to recap all the things we talked about. So the first question we wanted to answer is, what is research? And the takeaway, the thing that I'd love for you guys to remember is that it is so broad. It is incredibly broad. So don't just think of like the stuff that you might see in photos in the media, like Iron Man's lab. That's kind of Hollywood. I don't know if that's there might be research out there like that, but it's definitely not necessarily an accurate representation. So anyway, be open-minded to the possibility that there are thousands of incredibly diverse and cool research projects. The second point is, why should I do it? Was the second question. And the point of that is try a couple of things and find out what you like. The easiest way to figure out whether you love or are ambivalent about or hate a particular field is doing it firsthand. You'll find out really fast that maybe if you play a game of wiffle ball, you'll find that you love wiffle ball, right? It's the same is true for research if you're doing anything that is career oriented. Pretty quickly, you should get a sense of whether it resonates with you or not. And knowing that is really valuable. It'll save you some time. It'll help you kind of focus on the things that you are interested in. So answering that question early is good. And then the final point is more related to actually finding a research lab and the mechanics of approaching a professor, asking if they have vacancies, if you can get involved. And the takeaway there, hopefully, is that you should probably never stop asking questions. Questions are a fantastic way to kind of learn more from these incredibly knowledgeable people that are really sort of the authorities and the experts in their field. And so, yeah, don't feel like you have to bring answers to a professor. If you approach them, just bring questions. They're probably going to appreciate that too. So, okay, those were the three kind of main points I wanted to focus on. At this point, I don't have any other information or materials prepared. I wanted to be a little bit concise. So if you guys have questions, I'm happy to answer them for the remainder of the hour. Feel free to type them into the chat. I will also put up this slide. So this is just a way to get in touch with me. On Twitter, I'm at OscarJask. And then my email is oscar@experiment.com. So please send me questions. I will absolutely answer all of them. So that's if you think about questions afterwards. If you think about them now, definitely hit the Q&A button. Cool. And then if there aren't any further questions, that's okay too. I can kind of hang around and I won't stare into the camera the whole time, so it's not super awkward. But yeah, like I said, I'm here, so feel free to ask them. Okay. Cool. So I'll check back every so often. If there's a question, I'll make sure to jump on it. Okay. Thanks, guys.